Hi, Matt Pullen here. So I was at a high school chess tournament. I was a steward, which basically means I go around and answer people's questions about the rules of tournament chess. And I noticed a lot of subpar endgame play from the high school players. I think that most of them spend way too much time practicing their openings and tricks and stuff, as opposed to knowing essential endgame concepts. I, for example, saw an endgame King Rook versus King Rook, and I thought about stopping the game, because it's a draw. But the tournament director said no, let him play. So I watched the game, because one side was kind of low on time. And it was King Rook, King Rook. The side that was low on time actually skewered the other person's king and won a rook. So it was a winning endgame with King and Rook versus King. The side with the rook marched all the way down the board and had checkmate and won. But instead of moving the rook to the back rank, he moved the rook over one and wedged the other person's king in the corner for stalemate. So it should have been a draw, and it was a draw because two blunders canceled each other out. But this is an endgame that was actually really pretty, that the players didn't quite get it, but I looked at it after the game, and I think it's really neat. White has 3 pawns. He wants to queen, but he is in check. And what happened in the game was he played his king to the back with king g8. Now, white in this position has 10 seconds, but there's a time delay of 5 seconds. Black, on the other hand, has 20 minutes, so plenty of time for black to think, not enough time for white to think, maybe. But if white gets an easy ending, then with the time delay he should be able to hold. So king h6 is the easiest draw for white in this position because he's threatening to queen on the last rank, and black either needs to attack that square where white can repeat this position, or black can check the white king, which also lets white repeat this position. So king h6 is a simple draw for white. King g8 has the same idea. It attacks the queening square and threatens to queen the pawn, but you don't really need to cover the queening square with your king in this case. And in this case, white actually should have gotten into some trouble because he put his king in a very vulnerable spot. Now in the game, black just kept on checking, and in this position, black, for some reason, I have no idea why, decided to play rook takes pawn. And this is a dead loss, of course, because king takes, and the black king can never take this backward white pawn, because then the forward white pawn would just run. So, for example, king takes and then push, and the pawn pushes to queen without problem. There's no way that the black king can get in the square. So this is a win for white, and even if you have less than 5 seconds on your clock, if you have a time delay, no one should have any trouble winning this game. So I can't understand the decision to play rook takes pawn. Your opponent is low on time, and you're giving yourself no winning chances in a dead lost ending. But instead, I think that black should have played king f6. And actually, after the game, I said that I thought black was winning in this ending, because the idea of king f6 is white will queen the pawn with check, and then the black king moves over, and he's threatening to checkmate on the corner with rook to a8 mate. And what can white do? You can't check over here because there's not enough board. You can't check here or here because the rook can capture. You can't check here or here either because those squares are not protected. You can't defend the corner from this corner because then rook takes queen. And you can't play here because your pawns are in the way. This is checkmate. So even though white queened a pawn with check, this position is lost for white. But that is not the final word in this position. If white sees that he cannot queen the pawn with check, he will find this deflection, e5 check. And king takes loses, because then the queen with check and the black king can't get to the critical square g6, so white wins here. So black has to go over to g6, and now white knights the pawn with check, so there's no time to checkmate. The black king has to move, and then the knight comes to protect the pawn. And this position with the knight and two pawns, it's not very dangerous for black because he can always play rook takes knight and then take the two pawns with his king. Black can actually try to win this. And if white only has, 5 seconds on his clock, then it's a very difficult defense. Even with the rook against the knight, it's still a difficult defense. For instance, king to e6, threatening the knight. So if the knight goes anywhere, then king takes e5, except if the knight goes to d8 for check, then king takes would lead to knight c6 check, winning the rook, and it's a draw, because the knight can't win by itself. But instead of taking the pawn, this move attacks the knight again, and the only place the knight can go is f7, and now king to e7, or actually you can play rook a8 here, and then you can keep the initiative with king to e6, threatening to pin and win the knight on f7. And if you play something like king over here, then rook check, and the white king cannot continue to guard the knight. So this would go something like king attacks the rook, king takes knight, e6 check, the deflection. You can't take it because king takes rook and it's a draw, so you move to protect your rook, and then e7 check, another deflection. So again, you can't take the pawn, you have to move. But then if e8 queen, then just rook takes, and black wins. So there are a lot of pitfalls for white to fall into, but this ending should be a draw, I believe. Even if you give up the two pawns in order to get the white king to come to the center, this is a position that can be difficult to draw, even though rook versus knight is a theoretical draw. If the white king is centralized enough and the knight is not badly placed. But again, I once beat 2200 with the rook in an ending like this on the ICC. And if white is a high school player with less than 5 seconds on his clock, then this defense, it's very easy for white to go wrong. So I hope this gave you some insights into making practical decisions in rook versus pawn endings. For instance, black's decision to take on h7 was clearly wrong, and white's move king to g8 was much too risky. He should have just played h6 because there's no need to control the queen square with your king. So I hope you enjoyed this ending. I will talk to you in a bit.